found the billionaire lady hated physical touch until the single dad accidentally touches her during an interview. Her skin burned where his fingers had brushed against hers, passing the water glass across the mahogany desk. Eliza Harrington froze, her breath catching in her throat as the sensation, unwelcome yet electric, rippled through her body. The man sitting across from her, oblivious to the storm he'd just unleashed, continued answering her question about his qualifications for the executive position. But Eliza wasn't listening anymore. For the first time in 15 years, someone had touched her, and she hadn't immediately recoiled. Why him? Why now? And why, despite everything she knew about herself, did she suddenly want it to happen again? James Parker noticed her distraction and paused mid-sentence. "Ms. Harrington, is everything all right?" Their eyes met, and in that moment, neither could have possibly known how their lives were about to collide in ways that would shatter every wall she'd built around herself and every assumption he'd made about moving forward after loss. The interview room at Harrington Enterprises felt suddenly too small, too intimate. Eliza cleared her throat and straightened the papers before her, desperate to regain her legendary composure. "Yes, Mr. Parker. Please continue." But as he resumed speaking about his previous work experience, she found herself studying his hands, strong, capable hands that belonged to a man who clearly worked hard, both in boardrooms and, if the Caluses were any indication, at home too. The single father of an 8-year-old daughter wasn't what Eliza had expected when seeking a new chief operations officer, but his resume was impeccable, his references stellar. If only she could focus on those qualifications, instead of wondering why, after years of maintaining her careful distance from everyone, her body had betrayed her so completely with one accidental touch. What Eliza didn't know was that James had noticed her reaction, and was just as confused by the electricity he'd felt when their fingers met. After losing his wife 3 years ago, he'd resigned himself to focusing solely on raising Sophie and rebuilding his career. Romance wasn't in his plans. Yet something about the Ice Queen of the business world, infamous for her no-nonsense approach and the invisible bubble of personal space everyone knew not to breach, had awakened something he thought long dead. "I should tell you," James said suddenly, interrupting her thoughts, "that if offered this position, there may be occasional days when family obligations take priority. My daughter comes first, always." The directness of his statement caught Eliza off guard. Most candidates would hide such potential complications, especially when interviewing with someone known for her ruthless dedication to work above all else. His honesty was refreshing, dangerous. "Mr. Parker, The office door burst open, and Eliza's assistant rushed in, face pale. "Ms. Harrington, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but there's been a security breach at the Shanghai facility. The board is assembling for an emergency meeting in 5 minutes. Eliza stood immediately, her CEO persona sliding back into place like armor. "We'll have to continue this another time, Mr. Parker. My assistant will contact you to reschedule." As James gathered his portfolio, their eyes met once more. Something unspoken passed between them, a current of understanding, of curiosity, of possibility. "Of course," he said with a slight smile. "Some things can't wait." If only he knew how those words would come to define everything that followed. 3 days later, Eliza stood in the elevator of her penthouse building, mentally reviewing quarterly projections as she ascended to the 52nd floor. The Shanghai crisis had been contained, but the fallout would affect their Asian market share for at least 2 quarters. She needed that new COO more than ever, and James Parker's innovative approach to similar challenges at his previous company kept returning to her thoughts. Just his approach to business challenges. Nothing else, certainly not his warm brown eyes, or the way his voice had that slight rasp when he spoke passionately about supply chain ethics. The elevator stopped on the 34th floor, and Eliza stiffened, preparing for the awkward silence that always accompanied sharing an elevator with neighbors who'd long ago given up trying to make small talk with the Ice Queen. But when the doors opened, it wasn't a neighbor. It was Harrington. James Parker stood there, looking as surprised as she felt. Beside him was a small girl with curly hair pulled into uneven pigtails, clutching a science textbook nearly half her size. "Mr. Parker?" Eliza managed, her composure slipping for just a moment. "Dad, is that the lady from your interview?" The girl stage whispered, tugging at her father's sleeve. James nodded, stepping into the elevator with his daughter. "Sophie, this is Miss Harrington. Miss Harrington, my daughter Sophie." "Hello," Eliza said stiffly, pressing herself against the elevator wall to maintain maximum distance. Sophie studied her with unabashed curiosity. "Dad says you run a really big company that makes important things. Do you like science?" "I'm going to be a scientist who invents robots that clean the ocean." Despite herself, Eliza felt her lips twitch toward a smile. "I do like science. I studied chemical engineering before business." Sophie's eyes widened. "That's so cool! Dad, she's a scientist and a boss!" James laughed, the sound warming the confined space. "Sorry about the ambush. We're visiting my sister. She lives on 34. No apology necessary," Eliza said, then found herself asking, "How did the science fair project turn out?" She'd overheard him mention it during their interrupted interview. The genuine surprise and pleasure on James's face made something flutter in Eliza's chest. She won first place, built a working model of a water filtration system, all by myself, Sophie added proudly. "Well, Dad helped with the cutting parts." "Impressive," Eliza said, meaning it. The elevator chimed at the 52nd floor. As Eliza stepped out, Sophie called after her, "If you hire my dad, maybe you could come see my next project sometime." The doors closed before Eliza could respond, leaving her standing in her hallway, feeling strangely off balance. The encounter had lasted less than a minute, yet somehow it had left her more rattled than multi-billion-dollar negotiations. What was happening to her, and why couldn't she stop thinking about the way James had looked at her? Not with the intimidated deference she was accustomed to, but with genuine interest, and something that felt dangerously like understanding. If you're enjoying this unexpected connection between two people who never thought they'd open their hearts again, hit that like button! I'd love to know what you think might happen next in the comments below. The board meeting the following morning was contentious. The Shanghai situation had made several members nervous, and they were pushing for conservative measures that Eliza knew would only weaken their position long term. "With all due respect, Richard," she said, addressing the finance director, "pulling back from the Asian market now would be surrendering territory we've spent a decade developing. And what's your alternative?" Richard challenged. "We need someone with crisis management experience handling operations, and we needed them yesterday." Eliza took a deep breath. "I've made a decision on the CO position. James Parker will start next Monday." The announcement caused a stir around the table. Her HR director looked particularly surprised. "But we had 3 more candidates scheduled." "Cancel them," Eliza said firmly. "Parker has exactly the experience we need for this situation. His work restructuring Meridian Tech after their data breach saved the company millions, while actually strengthening their market position." What she didn't say was that she'd spent half the night reviewing his file again, convincing herself that her decision was based solely on qualifications and not on whatever had happened in that elevator or during their brief interview. The meeting adjourned, and Eliza returned to her office to find her assistant waiting with a stack of contracts. "I've prepared the offer for Mr. Parker," she said. Standard executive package. Eliza hesitated. Add the flexible hours clause from the parent accommodation policy. Her assistant's eyebrows rose slightly, but she nodded. Will you call him, or should I arrange for HR to make the offer? I'll handle it, Eliza said, surprising herself as much as her assistant. Alone in her office, Eliza stared at her phone for a full minute before dialing. When James answered, his voice sent an unexpected wave of warmth through her. Mr. Parker, this is Eliza Harrington. I'm calling to offer you the position of Chief Operations Officer at Harrington Enterprises. His momentary silence made her heart beat faster. Had she misread his interest in the position? I'm honored, he finally said. But before I accept, I need to be completely transparent about something. Eliza tensed. Go on. The flexible schedule isn't just about school pickups. Sophie has therapy twice a week. She's still processing her mother's death. Those appointments are non-negotiable for me. The vulnerability in his admission caught Eliza off guard. In her world, personal struggles were kept strictly private, weaknesses never revealed. Yet here was this man, laying bare his priorities without apology. Mr. Parker, James, she said, the use of his first name feeling strangely intimate. The position includes whatever flexibility you need for your daughter. I wouldn't have it any other way. Then I accept, he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Thank you for understanding. After they'd discussed start dates and paperwork, an awkward pause stretched between them. Sophie was quite impressed with you, James said finally. She's been asking if the science lady boss might want to see her collection of rocks sometime. Eliza found herself smiling. I had quite an impressive rock collection myself at her age. Maybe someday you could compare notes, he suggested, his tone careful, leaving the door open without pushing. Maybe, Eliza said, surprising herself again. I'll see you Monday, James. As she hung up, Eliza realized her hands were trembling slightly. What was she doing? She'd spent 15 years building walls around herself, keeping everyone at a safe distance. One accidental touch, one elevator encounter, and suddenly she was contemplating rock collections with an 8-year-old. The memory of her parents' accident flashed unbidden, the phone call that had shattered her world at 19. The realization that everyone she loved could be taken in an instant. The decision she'd made then had served her well: success without attachment, achievement without vulnerability. Touch was just a reminder of what could be lost. Yet something about James Parker and his daughter had slipped past her defenses. And for the first time in 15 years, Eliza wasn't immediately reinforcing those walls. Instead, she found herself wondering what might happen if she let them crumble just a little. James's first week as COO was a baptism by fire. The Shanghai situation required immediate attention, and he dove in with an energy and insight that impressed even Eliza's harshest critics on the board. They worked late most evenings, developing strategies and contingency plans. Eliza found herself increasingly comfortable in his presence, though she still maintained her physical distance. If James noticed how carefully she avoided any possibility of contact, he never mentioned it. On Friday evening, they were the last two in the office, reviewing reports in the conference room when James's phone rang. "It's my sister," he said, checking the screen. "Mind if I take this? She's with Sophie." Eliza nodded, and James stepped into the hallway. When he returned minutes later, his expression was troubled. "Everything okay?" Eliza asked, surprising herself with her concern. James ran a hand through his hair. "Sophie's running a fever. My sister needs to leave for her night shift, and our regular sitter is out of town." "Go," Eliza said immediately. "Family comes first." The gratitude in his eyes made her chest tighten. "These projections need to be ready for the board by morning. I'll handle it," she assured him, Go take care of your daughter." James hesitated, then gathered his things. At the door, he turned back. "Thank you, Eliza. Not every CEO would understand. Not every COO would work until 9 p.m. on their first Friday," she countered. "We're even." After he left, Eliza found herself working with renewed focus, determined to have everything perfect by morning. It was nearly midnight when she finished, her eyes burning from staring at spreadsheets. On impulse, she texted James, "Projections complete. How's Sophie?" His response came immediately, "Fevers down. Finally sleeping. Thank you again." Eliza stared at those simple words, feeling an unfamiliar warmth spread through her. When had anyone last thanked her with such genuine feeling? When had she last done something that deserved such thanks? The weekend passed slowly. Eliza found herself checking her phone more often than usual, telling herself she was just concerned about updates on the Shanghai situation. If she was also hoping for news about Sophie's recovery, well, that was simply professional courtesy toward her new CO. Monday morning, she arrived at the office earlier than usual, annoyed at her own eagerness to see James again. When he walked in at 8 a.m. sharp, the relief on his face told her everything. "Sophie's better?" she asked. "Much. Back to school today?" He confirmed. "The board meeting went well. They approved our strategy unanimously?" Eliza said. "Richard actually used the word impressed. Regarding your projections." James grinned. "High praise from the human calculator." Indeed, they fell into a comfortable rhythm over the next few weeks. James proved himself invaluable, his approach complementing Eliza's in ways that strengthened the company's position. The Shanghai crisis stabilized, and the board's confidence in both of them grew. What also grew, though neither acknowledged it, was the ease between them. Eliza found herself relaxing her rigid boundaries, inch by careful inch. She no longer flinched when James handed her documents or reached past her for the coffee pot. Once, when he made a particularly clever observation, during a meeting, she even touched his shoulder briefly in approval, a gesture so natural she didn't realize what she'd done until she saw the surprise in his eyes. If you're rooting for these two to break down more barriers, drop a heart in the comments! I love seeing which moments resonate with you all. The annual charity gala was Harrington Enterprises' biggest public relations event of the year. Eliza always attended alone, made her obligatory speech, wrote her substantial check, and left as soon as socially acceptable. This year, however, James would be attending as part of the executive team. Eliza told herself her unusual attention to her appearance, selecting a midnight blue gown rather than her standard black, allowing her hair to fall in soft waves, instead of her severe updo, had nothing to do with him. The ballroom was crowded when she arrived, immediately surrounded by board members and major clients. She was deep in conversation with an important investor when she felt a presence at her side and turned to find James, looking devastatingly handsome in his tuxedo. "Ems Harrington," he said formally, mindful of their audience. "You look stunning tonight." Something in his gaze made her breath catch. "Thank you, Mr. Parker. You clean up quite well yourself." The investor excused himself, leaving them momentarily alone in the crowded room. "I didn't expect to see you mingling," Eliza admitted. "Most executives make their appearance and retreat to the bar." James smiled. "I've never been one for following the expected path." "I've noticed," she said, returning his smile with a small one of her own. The orchestra began playing, and couples moved toward the dance floor. James hesitated, then extended his hand. "Would you care to dance?" Eliza froze, staring at his outstretched palm. Dancing meant touching, sustained, intentional contact. Her heart raced, panic rising in her throat. James immediately lowered his hand, understanding in his eyes. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have." "No," Eliza interrupted, surprising herself. "I'd like to." It's been a long time." Slowly, deliberately, she placed her hand in his. The contact sent a shock through her system, not unpleasant, but overwhelming. James's fingers closed gently around hers, and he led her to the dance floor. As they began to move to the music, Eliza kept herself as distant as the dance allowed, her body rigid with tension. James maintained the proper form, his touch light on her waist, respectful of her obvious discomfort. "Relax," he murmured. "I promise not to step on your toes." Despite herself, Eliza laughed softly. "It's not that. I'm just not used to this. Dancing. Being close to someone," she admitted, the words slipping out before she could stop them. James's eyes softened. "We can stop." "No," she said again, more firmly this time. "I don't want to stop," and she didn't. As they continued to dance, Eliza felt her body gradually relaxing, the warmth of James's hand on her waist becoming less frightening, more comforting. By the second song, she had moved imperceptibly closer, close enough to catch the subtle scent of his cologne. "You're a natural," he said softly. "I had lessons as a child," she replied. "My parents insisted. They believed in being well-rounded." The mention of her parents caused a shadow to cross her face, and James noticed immediately. "You don't talk about them much." He observed carefully. Eliza's steps faltered slightly. "They died when I was 19. Car accident." James's hand tightened slightly on hers, not in pity, but in understanding. "I'm sorry. That explains a lot, does it?" she asked, suddenly feeling exposed. "The walls you build, the distance you keep." His eyes held hers. "When Sophie's mother died, I wanted to put Sophie in a bubble where nothing could ever hurt her again. I imagine losing your parents so young might make you want to protect yourself the same way." The music ended, but they remained on the dance floor, still connected. Eliza felt dizzy, not from the dancing, but from the sensation of being truly seen for the first time in years. "James, Harrington!" The chairman of the board appeared beside them. "The speech is scheduled in 5 minutes." The moment shattered. Eliza stepped back, breaking contact with James, her professional mask sliding back into place. "Of course. Thank you." As she walked away to prepare, she could feel James's eyes following her. Something had shifted between them on that dance floor, something that both terrified and exhilarated her. The following Monday, Eliza found a small gift box on her desk when she arrived at the office. Inside was a beautiful piece of rose quartz with a simple note. "Sophie thought your rock collection might need this. It's her favorite." The gesture touched her deeply. That evening, as they worked late reviewing acquisition proposals, Eliza found herself sharing stories about her childhood rock hunting expeditions with her father. James listened attentively, offering his own memories of teaching Sophie to skip stones at the lake where he'd proposed to his late wife. "Do you ever worry," Eliza asked suddenly, "about loving someone again after losing her?" The question hung between them, its real meaning unmistakable. James considered carefully before answering. "Every day. But Sophie taught me something important. She said, 'Daddy, having a heart is scary because it can break, but not having one is scarier.'" "Wise kid," Eliza murmured. "She gets that from her mother?" James said with a sad smile. "But she's right. The alternative to risking pain is emptiness." Eliza looked down at her hands. "I've built a successful life around that emptiness." "Have you?" James asked gently. "Or have you built a successful company around it?" The question hit her like a physical blow. Before she could respond, her phone rang, the Shanghai team with an urgent update. The moment passed, but his words lingered. That night, alone in her penthouse, Eliza found herself standing before the mirror, really looking at herself for the first time in years. The woman who stared back was accomplished, powerful, respected, and utterly alone. Was that emptiness truly a choice she'd made, or a prison she'd built? For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to let someone in, to let James in. The thought was terrifying. And yet, the next morning, she made a decision. After their executive meeting, she asked James to stay behind. "I'd like to meet Sophie," she said, the words rushing out before she could reconsider. Properly, I mean. To see her rock collection. The surprise and pleasure on James's face made her heart race. She would love that. So would I. I can't promise. Eliza began, then stopped. "This is difficult for me," James nodded, understanding in his eyes. One step at a time. No pressure. That Saturday, Eliza found herself standing outside James's modest brownstone, clutching a gift bag containing a professional grade magnifying glass for examining rocks. Her hand trembled slightly as she rang the doorbell. Sophie answered, her face lighting up with excitement. "Dad! The science lady boss is here." James appeared behind his daughter, smiling warmly. "Her name is Eliza, remember." "Come see my rocks, Eliza!" Sophie grabbed her hand without hesitation, pulling her inside. The contact was startling but not unwelcome. Eliza allowed herself to be led through the cozy home to Sophie's bedroom, where a carefully organized collection of rocks and minerals was displayed on shelves. For the next hour, Eliza found herself completely engaged in Sophie's enthusiastic explanations of each specimen. The girl's knowledge was impressive for her age, her passion infectious. When Eliza presented the magnifying glass, Sophie's squeal of delight was worth every moment of anxiety Eliza had felt about this visit. "Dad, look what Eliza brought me!" "Now I can see all the tiny crystals." James leaned against the doorframe, watching them with a soft expression that made Eliza's chest tighten. That was thoughtful of her, wasn't it? The most thoughtful. Sophie agreed emphatically. "Can Eliza stay for dinner?" "I helped make spaghetti." James looked at Eliza, leaving the decision entirely to her. He mouthed silently. To her own surprise, Eliza found herself nodding. "I'd love to stay." Dinner was unlike anything Eliza had experienced in years, warm, chaotic, filled with laughter as Sophie regaled her with school stories and James teased his daughter about her selective eating habits. Eliza found herself relaxing, even accepting a second helping of the slightly overcooked pasta that Sophie had proudly helped prepare. As the evening drew to a close, Sophie insisted on showing Eliza one last treasure, a photo album of her mother. "This is my mom," she said matter-of-factly, pointing to a beautiful woman with Sophie's curly hair. "She's in heaven now, but Dad says she still watches over me." James started to intervene, clearly concerned this might make Eliza uncomfortable, but Eliza shook her head slightly. "She looks like she was wonderful," Eliza said gently. Sophie nodded. She was. Dad was really sad for a long time after she left. But he's happier now. She looked up at Eliza with innocent perception. "I think it's because of you. If you're feeling the emotions building in this story, hit that like button. I'd love to know which character you relate to most in the comments." James walked Eliza to her car after Sophie had been tucked in. "I'm sorry if that was too much," he said. "Sophie can be direct?" "Don't apologize," Eliza said. "She's remarkable. You've done an amazing job with her." They stood beside her car, the evening air cool around them. James was careful to maintain the distance Eliza usually preferred, but something had shifted inside her during this evening. Slowly, deliberately, Eliza reached out and took his hand. James looked down at their joined hands, then back at her face, his expression questioning. "I'm terrified," she admitted quietly. "But I think Sophie might be right. Not having a heart is scarier than having one that can break." James stepped closer, his free hand gently touching her cheek. "Eliza, I would never." "I know," she interrupted. "That's why I'm willing to try." When his lips met hers, the world didn't end. The pain of past losses didn't vanish. But something new began, something worth the risk. In the months that followed, Eliza learned that opening her heart didn't make her weaker. It made her stronger in ways she'd never imagined. The walls she'd built came down slowly, brick by careful brick. There were setbacks and moments of panic, times when the fear of loss nearly overwhelmed her. But there were also movie nights with Sophie, weekend hikes where they added to both their rock collections, and quiet evenings with James that filled the emptiness she'd lived with for so long. At the next year's charity gala, Eliza didn't arrive alone, and when James led her to the dance floor, she moved into his arms without hesitation. Her body relaxed against his as they swayed to the music. "Happy," he murmured against her hair. "Terrified," she replied honestly. "But yes, happier than I ever thought possible." Because sometimes the things that terrify us most are exactly what we need to truly live. Sometimes an accidental touch can start a journey that changes everything. And sometimes the walls we build to protect ourselves become the very prisons we need to escape. As Eliza rested her head against James's shoulder, she silently thanked the universe for that moment in her office, when his fingers had accidentally brushed against hers, and her carefully constructed world had begun its beautiful collapse. I hope this story touched your heart today. Life is too short to let fear keep us from connection. Where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. I'd love to know how far this message of hope and healing has traveled. And remember, sometimes the bravest thing we can do is simply reach out and touch another soul.